As a part of this project, we are supposed to think of the ways that we could use these theories to affect our teaching of adults. I'm choosing to do a mock lesson on how to do a close reading of a poem. I chose to do this because my sister is taking a college class on poetry and modern literature, and she's having trouble doing it, and especially when it comes to understanding what a poem's meaning is. So, since this is something that I can do pretty well, I thought it would be easy for me to help her and possibly help other people. So, I would start off talking to her about why it's important she needs to know this information, why it's important she is able to do a close reading of a text, and that is because it's going to help her as a reader in general. It's going to help her get through this class, which she needs to graduate, and it's also just going to help her have a better understanding of the world around her. Then I'm going to encourage her that she is able to read, so she's going to be able to make sense out of these poems. It's not very hard, it's just tricky to understand if you don't know it already. I'm also going to encourage her because a recent professor that I had showed me this poem and kind of illuminated to me that a poem doesn't necessarily have one definite meaning, but you can have a better understanding of what the meaning is by looking at the text specifically. So, at that point, you can ask the student what they already know. I already know that she has problems with reading poems, so she knows that too. So we've got a pretty good understanding of where she is academically, and then we can move on from there. So, as a part of my process, I would start by an example of what she is supposed to be doing. So I picked out a poem to read and then analyze based on the text itself. So I'm going to do Introduction to Poetry by Billy Collins. It's a very famous poem, and it's a great one considering the content that we're talking about. So it says, Introduction to Poetry by Billy Collins. I ask them to take a poem and hold it to the light, like a color slide, or press an ear against its hive. I say, drop a mouse into a poem and watch him probe his way out, or walk inside the poem's room and feel the walls for a light switch. I want them to water ski across the surface of a poem, waving the author's name on the shore. But all they want to do is tie the poem to a chair with a rope and torture a confession out of it. They begin beating it with a hose to find out what it really means. At this point, I would stop and start asking some questions. What do you think this means? What did you feel about when they started saying this sort of thing about the poem? Can you see any patterns? Stuff like that. For me, I noticed the beginning of the poem is really heavy and like this kind of happier feeling. Their water skiing is fun. You can't ever have a bad time water skiing. Let's look at that. We're talking about the shore. That's all beautiful. And then there's this but word, and that's when there's sort of a flip, a turn in the way the poem is going. And that's an important thing to recognize as a literary element. So there's, but all they want to do is tie a poem to a chair with a rope. That stops being fun for me right there. So we know that Billy Collins is trying to say through the persona that poems don't necessarily have to have a meaning, and they don't have to be all about trying to find out what the meaning is. You should be able to look at a poem and listen to it or hear it or look at it again and just be able to appreciate it for what it is, instead of just being like, well, now I know for sure that it is about unicorns. Because it doesn't have to be about one specific thing, especially because the role of interpreter from the reader is extremely variable because of our own experiences as individuals. So, at that point, I would give the students a new poem, and I would walk them through it. I would let them read it, or if they wanted, I would read it for them, and then we would look at individual pieces of the poem, just like I did right there, and try to figure out how to do a close reading of that poem, but with them as the leader. Alright, I hope that is helpful, and maybe you can use that too. I hope you appreciated the poem. It's one of my favorites, and have a good day. Bye.